Good heavens, a woman? What is the world coming to?
Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if this is your first time. This is a video that's a response video to Kim from middle of the March. Oh, got trapped. Middle of the book march. Check her channel, it's fantastic. She always talks about her reading, but she now and again does some videos where she's just thinking about a subject relating to books as well and trying to articulate how she feels about it, which I'm going to do now. It's about gender. I'm only going to be talking about female and male genders because I don't feel like I've read that much of transgender stuff to make a comment. So I will be doing more of that, but I don't know which authors out there are transgender. It's something for me to look into. But I do think it's a fascinating subject about female authors, male authors, why you read more of one or the other. I do have a conclusion, by the way, but I'll get there in a minute. Let's talk about some authors and some books first. I want to talk about some of my favourite female authors, some of my favourite books written by female authors, and some of the books I'm going to read as well, which you guys might be able to comment on when you see the ones I'm going to read. So let's go back to a time when, and I don't know if it happens as much now, but a time when authors pretty much made it a little bit unclear what their gender was by having initials as their name, or sometimes in the case of George Eliot or James Tiptree Jr., you'd have them actually look like a male author from their name. But you got this thing with like DC Fontana in the Star Trek world. She wrote for Star Trek, and she deliberately put DC Fontana as her name as she was writing for the magazines and stuff. P.D. James is an example of that. I didn't realise when I watched the film of Children of Men years and years back that P.D. James was a woman. I thought P.D. James was this sort of old bald man. It's funny how you do that. But anyway, I read this. This was a massive disappointment, by the way. I thought this was not a particularly good book. And it's the only P.D. James I've read, but she's very popular for murder mystery kind of crime stuff, isn't she? But this book I read because we wanted to, it was part of this book club thing we were doing of reading apocalyptic stuff. And I was disappointed by it. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the film. The film is incredible. And I think this was just okay at best. But I think it's interesting that P.D. James called themselves P.D. James and didn't make it obvious that P.D. James was a woman. So let's talk about some of my favourite authors. So Ursula K. Le Guin is definitely one of my favourite authors. She's in my top 3 authors easily. And I've got a few things. I've got a big collection, but I've got a few things I haven't read that I'm really looking forward to getting into in her collection. But this is my favourite one, Dispossessed. And it's a really interesting exploration of political philosophy, an anarchist society versus a capitalist society. And she kind of looks at that through the eyes of the envoy who's over there trying to put the two societies together. It's a really good book, and I think, well, my favourite one of hers, not necessarily her best, but it was my favourite one of hers. And then the most celebrated one is The Left-Handed Darkness, which does actually explore gender. It was quite important at the time because not a lot of people were doing it, and this was written at a time when science fiction was absolutely dominated by men. It's not necessarily the case now. But yeah, in this book, there's a love story at the heart of this that's done beautifully. I think this is one of the books out of all of these. There's a few, I think 3 books that I think you can tell this is written by a woman. I think there is something about the approach. Again, it's very difficult to articulate without making generalizations, but there's something about the approach that feels quite female, feminine. There seems to be a feminine touch to this. Although one of the interesting things about Ursula K. Le Guin is that she used to say that her early work, she was writing with a male voice. So this is one of her early books, and she said that she'd written this and all these other things in the early years with a male writing voice because she thought she needed to get published. And that is really interesting. One, it's an interesting thing that she's saying anyway, but to what does that mean when I'm not noticing that when I'm reading it? And I'm suggesting as well, with that one, you could tell it's written by a woman. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, if you think about some of the more acerbic, visceral writers like Harlan Ellison and J.G. Ballard, I think they're very clearly men writing. There's something very masculine about their writing style. But I don't know, I think most writers, it's not that obvious. So, anyway, nipping down from Ursula K. Le Guin, another favourite of mine is Claire North. And I've praised Claire North a lot on my channel, but The Sudden Appearance of Hope is actually one I'd suggest could be another book where you can tell it's written by a woman. It's a first-person book about a woman that doesn't get noticed. She's got this curse. This girl's got this curse that if she leaves someone's company, they've forgotten that they ever knew her, and she ends up trying to do something important with this curse that ends up being a bit of a talent as well. It's a fantastic book. I think it's brilliant. I definitely recommend it. But I do think that's possibly another one that could go under that kind of banner of a book written by a female where you can tell it's written by a female. Again, I don't think it's that common, but I think that's true. I don't think that's necessarily true with this one, Touch, which is my favourite Claire North book. The most famous one is the first 15 Lives of Harry August, and I definitely, with both of these, I don't think it's that obvious it's written by a woman. So tell me if you think that's crazy, if you think you can really tell. Probably a lot of you have read this one. I don't know how many of you have read this one. But yeah, I mean, I don't really see it. I think it could be written by any gender. But great books. But yeah, that's, if I'm thinking about that from that perspective, I can't tell that in those two books. This next one, I think I can. So this is Hiromi Kawakami, who I've rated a lot on the channel. I think she's brilliant. She's very unpredictable, not in quality, but in what she's going to write. She's got quite an interesting... It's just, you can't really define her in a few words, really, I don't think. There's something fantastical about what she writes quite often, but this is a very sort of domesticated, ordinary book in a lot of ways. It's a very subtle book about a love story between a woman in her 30s and her old teacher that she meets again way after they were in education, and he's in his 60s. I think they sort of develop this relationship. And I think if a man wrote this, it'd be really different. I think it would be cruder. I think it would be simplistic. I don't want to damn male writers, but I do think there's a subtlety in here that I think comes from the fact that it's written by a woman, I think. I mean, the professor character is also quite gentle, and I don't know if a man would write that kind of dynamic. But again, we're making generalizations here. But it's a wonderful book that I think put her on the map. And I've got this one to read as well, The Third Love. Recently bought this. I'm very excited to read this. And there's not a lot I haven't read by her. That seems to be a bit of a knock on the book there. That's not good. Yeah, Third Love. It's her newest one. So I'm looking forward to getting to this. And, you know, we'll see if that's another thing. I don't think in general her books have that kind of feminine touch. I think it's true for Strange Weather in Tokyo, but I don't think it's true with the other ones. Yeah, there was one, just thinking, there was one short story that I read. It's a really bizarre story about a family, and it's a really weird story. There's a little bit of a feminine touch to that, I think, about the way there's like relationships between brother-in-laws and cousins that are dead, and there's this sort of romanticized prose in there that maybe you could argue that difficult to be that specific without spoiling it, but it's a weird story. But that was in another one of her books. This is a Becky Chambers book, Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, another of my favourite female authors. I don't think you can necessarily tell it's written by a woman. I don't know, maybe someone in the comments will say, oh no, clearly is. I think you can tell, if you knew already, I think you can see the signs. I think, again, sometimes with these things you need to know already, but I think you can see the signs that this is from a gay perspective, because there's a definite exploration of different lifestyles, different species that have different needs, and it's done really sensitively and intelligently, maturely, in a way that possibly would be influenced by the fact that they're coming from their own experience, maybe. So, yeah, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is a brilliant book, but possibly an example of that, but not necessarily an obvious female voice, feminine voice, I don't think. So, those are some of my favourite female authors. There's a few books that I've got ready that are just some of my favourite books, and they're a little bit one-offs. Oh, actually, this isn't a one-off, but the series is a one-off in a way. So this is Jodie Taylor's Chronicles of St. Mary's, and I've got this is number 8 here. This is the book I'm on the 8th, so I've read 7 of these books, and I think they're a lot of fun. And I think these are definitely clearly written by a woman. So I think with this book, with this series, sorry, Jodie Taylor is projecting herself through her character, Maxine. Max is very funny in it. She's at the heart of all of the action in the books, and they go back in time, and something goes wrong, and then she manages to just about get back into the present day. But there's all sorts of shenanigans that happens. It's a light, fun romp kind of read. And the first book, by the way, is called Just One Damn Thing After Another, which is a very famous quote about history. Just one damn thing after another. History is just one damn thing after another. And Maxine is this character that at the start of the first book joins this university called St. Mary's, and they go back in time and blah, blah, blah. I think this is definitely written from a feminine perspective. I think you can tell, you can hear it in the prose. So, yeah, I do think that's actually the case like that. Don't think you can always see that, but I think that's the case for Jodie Taylor's Chronicles of Mary series. So there's 3 books here I wanted to talk about that I absolutely love that are written by women, but they're one-offs in a sense. I haven't read anything else by them. So you've got The Summer We All Ran Away by Cassandra Parkin. This is a relationship book. It's a deep, intriguing, compelling book about 5 or 6 characters that are in different timelines as well, and their relationships and their internal struggle as well. It's a really good book, and it was sent to me by a friend who said, "You'll like this," and it was just a really awesome gift because I thought it was brilliant. So I'm going to read more by her, but this is a really good book, and potentially I can see why someone might argue that it's obvious you can hear the female voice in the writing. Maybe I can see that, so maybe bit on the fence with that one, but maybe. This one, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, I don't think it's obvious that that's written by a woman. I think it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think it's obvious that someone who's interested and knowledgeable about the gaming industry wrote this, although saying that might have been through research. But I don't think it's obvious that it's a woman. Let me know if you disagree with that. I think a lot of people that are watching this video would have read this book because it's been read a lot. But I think it's brilliant. Really, I couldn't put it down. I was chomping a bit to get to the next bit. I thought it was a brilliant book. But yeah, I don't really think necessarily that you can see that it's written by a woman in that one. And then this one is my favourite non-fiction book I've read for ages. I thought it was a fantastic book by Catherine Nixie, and it's a book about it's got a subheading, The Christian Destruction of the Classical World. So it's about how religion changed and the structures of religion changed thanks to the Christian Roman Catholic Church stamping on everything. It's a really interesting book, The Darkening Age. Maybe you see that the way it's written, The Darkening Age. Fantastic book. Definitely can't tell that's written by a woman. It's just a really well-researched history book that's got a very important subject. So there's that. And then there's a few books I'm going to read. I'm going to tell you about the ones I'm going to read. So tomorrow I'm going to start reading this, which is the sequel to Vicious by V.E. Schwab. And Vicious I thought was fantastic. So I could have included that in one of those one-off books. It was really good. But I wanted to include this as mentioning something I'm going to read. It's a bit bigger than Vicious. But I thought the way it's written was really good. And I didn't notice in the first book that had this sort of feminine voice in the writing. So I don't think that's necessarily the case with this series. But, maybe that'll be a thing. But yeah, really good book. Let me know if you've read that. But I'm buddy reading this with Chaz, Bookish Chaz, and Dave from Book Blabber as well. So Dave and Chaz, the three of us are reading this together this month. And I'm going to read Anne Rice's interview with the vampire as part of the Banned Books project. So I still haven't read this, and I should have read this by now. So I'm going to read this. Again, I'm not expecting a feminine / female author's voice, but I don't know. I'm going to read Kindred by Octavia Butler, because I still haven't read this yet, which is crazy, isn't it? But I'm expecting to love it, but don't know if I'm going to get this sort of sense of a female voice in it. But I'm going to read this, and I'm sure it's going to be one of my faves. So that's true. And Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks. So this was praised a lot on BookTube probably about a year or so ago, maybe more than that, maybe a couple of years ago. And I bought this at the last London meetup, BookTubers meetup. But yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this. But I don't know anything by Jacqueline Crooks before. I don't know if this is her first book or if she's written a bunch of them. I just hadn't seen her name before. But Fire Rush has been very celebrated on BookTube. And I'm also going to read Donna Tartt's The Secret History. So this is obviously very famous, very successful, very acclaimed book. And a friend of mine lent me a knackered copy, and I thought, well, I found it in a charity shop or something, so I bought it secondhand. Really pleased to get a nice. It's actually really nice copying. There's no, the spine feels like it's not really been read much. It might have been someone read it like that, because I don't tend to do that with the spines. I tend to sort of read it like that. So someone must have done that, because it's pretty good condition. But anyway, I don't know whether I'll see a female voice in the writing with this one, but that's on my radar to read soon as well. And then the last thing, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a spoiler for the Belief and Behaviour bi-monthly book club that I'm going to start next year. Why not feed this through slowly? So the Belief and Behaviour bi-monthly book club that starts next year is going to feature this book, From the Beast to the Blonde by Marina Warner. And it's an examination of fairy tales and the way they've been told over the centuries and how we interact with fairy tales. And it's a classic sort of literary criticism book. And yeah, that's part of my book club for next year. So we'll see what happens with that, see who wants to get involved in reading that. But one of the things I was going to say, bouncing off this, is I do think that there seems to be more female writers writing retellings of fairy tales or books about fairy tales than men. So that's interesting. I don't know why that is, but it does seem to be that a lot of the fairy tale books seem to be written by women, and the retellings of fairy tales, you know, Sarah J. Maas and Naomi Novak and people like that. So there's lots of that kind of thing, but they seem to be a lot of them seem to be written by women. Is that because there's a these are generalizations? Is that because of the romanticism in fairy tales? I don't know. Seems strange to make these generalized comments about an entire gender, but it's an interesting thing to think about, because ultimately the heart of Kim's video was, am I reading more male authors than female authors? Am I reading more female authors than male authors? And I will say, as a conclusion to this video, that if you look at my favourite authors and you look at all the books I've read, they are mostly male. But I think that's because the publishing world has changed, and because I read stuff from way back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they are mostly male. It's very rare that you'll get a female author back in those times. You know, they were there, but it wasn't quite as common as the male authors. And then as time's gone on, things have changed, things have got better, and there's more female authors on the shelves and in publishing. And now there's quite a lot of female authors in the bookshelves, which is great. So most of the new discoveries I've made have been women. So most of the newer authors I'm reading are female authors. So that's redressing the balance a little bit, but that's simply because they're out on the bookshelves and they're getting published. I think if things had stayed the same, then I might look for the female authors, but I would keep seeing male authors, you know, whereas you don't have to look that hard to find new female authors now, which is great. So that's an interesting thing. You know, I discovered this one through people celebrating the book rather than the author. You know, I was sent this randomly. I was reading it because it was sent to me. This captivated me because the idea of time travel, and I wasn't sure whether there'd be a female voice in it or whatever. So I don't necessarily grab it. I don't look really hard for it, but I will say that it's easier to find female authors now than it used to be, and it's quite a nice thing that we've got that balance, and so many authors I'm discovering now are female authors. So there we are. Those are my favourites. Those are some of the great books I've read that I think are great books that I've read by female authors, and some of the ones I'm going to read in future. Please comment below on any of that. You know, if you've read some of the ones I've read, or read some of the ones I'm going to read, or looking forward to spoiler, the Belief and Behaviour Bi-Monthly Book Club. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Stay curious.
Paint me a picture